Hi, and welcome to Leaving Babylon. I'm Madeline. Thank you for joining on this special podcast with my friend Topher from BioCharisma. Hi, Topher. How are you?
I'm doing great, Madeline. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Yeah, nice to have you. I know we've sort of moved in similar circles for a little while on the YouTube scene, but you also have your own website, which is topherhq.com.
Hmm.
So I just kind of found it the other day. I've always seen you on YouTube, so I didn't realize you actually had your own website. But there's a lot of information there and other podcasts and stuff like that. So it's really interesting. Do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit and what you're working on?
Hi, everyone. I'm Topher. My full name is Christopher Gardner. Topher is just the back end of Christopher. I'm a builder right now. I build domes, curvilinear structures. I specialize in thin shell concrete, ferrocement, and geopolymers. So naturally, building all that type of stuff, I'm very into looking into arches, vaults, all these types of things that are associated with old world architecture. And I actually got into building curvilinear structures because I have been a deep tissue myofascial release therapist for God, 26 years now professionally. And so
Wow.
I got to work in very, very high-end spas and healing centers. And I always noticed like how curvy the buildings were, the rooms that I worked in. I always had such a better feel, and my clients would have a much better experience. So in and I grew up in South Florida where we have a lot of hurricanes, and so growing up and seeing hurricanes essentially decimate, cubes, what most houses are, they're, box construction. Just the combination of all those things have led me into my professional life where I either sculpt humans or I sculpt structures that hold humans, either way. And then I like to talk. So
Yeah.
I have a podcast, and my podcast is just there so I can meet people like you that I admire, and I listen to, and have these beautiful ways of looking and describing the world as they see it, and I just want to talk to those people. So I started a podcast about 10 years ago, and I've been having I did it for about a year, and then I was 6 years off, and then I restarted it a few years ago. And yeah, it's a constant learning endeavor that I've been into.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, it is amazing how much all of the skills that you highlight on your website actually come together in a really
Mhm.
organic way, like the tissue work that you were talking about, like the body and the environment and the structures that are built within the environment. So I find that really interesting.
Mhm.
But like the dome work in particular, like I think you're the only person actually able to speak to that in
Mhm.
this community, particularly with the experience behind you, the knowledge, and that kind of hands-on um, firsthand experience. So that's really interesting to me. And I think the domes are a big aspect to our realm and all of that lost understanding of what happened before our generation got here, who were
Mhm.
those people and what were those domes all about really. So I
Yeah.
find that interesting. But you and I have a shared interest in cosmology, which I think is really
Yes.
interesting as well. So maybe
Mhm.
that's something we'll start with. I mean, something that's kind of been on my mind lately is, and I'm going to ask you this, we haven't spoken about this before, but do you think that we live in a circular, flat, I guess textured, obviously, but like basically a flat realm inside a circle? Or what is your concept of the cosmological, framework that we live in?
I believe we live in an envelope, and the
Okay.
envelope is inside the envelope is space as we would know it. Because space is like for you and I to move our limbs and everything, we need space to move. And
Yeah.
this is God's creation. Inside this envelope is God's creation. Outside of that envelope of space is eternity. And so the inside that it appears, I use that word specifically, it appears flat. And from our vantage point, because if you were to think of us, we're the center point of a compass. From
Yeah.
our vantage point, it's circular, but it's from our vantage point. I don't think that there is a hard, fast barrier. Like I know a lot of people that believe that there is a firmament that's like a dome. To me, the firmament, it would be the boundary layer between what is physical and non-physical. And it would appear to be like a big bubble. You
Okay.
know, we see bubbles, you know, in nature, and I think this God's hologram that we live in, this material reality that we live in, is holographic in nature, meaning that it has a repeating aspect to it where you could take any one part of it. It's very much like the Bible. Like the Bible, I look at it as like a holotropic book. You could take any part of it and it almost fully self replicates itself. And I think our creation is very much similar to that. And the appearance of the round things and the bulbous nature of things has everything to do with our vantage point, how we actually perceive.
That's
Does that
interesting.
does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it does actually make sense because I think that concept of something being circular is like you put a piece of string in a nail and the size of it is only so big as you can your
Right.
imagination allows you to be, which would be a circle because that's your circumference
Hmm.
of existence. But yeah, I can see what you're saying. And recently I just wondered about, that kind of because we've been talking about distances and where locations are. And according to recent research on the international dateline, there's kind of this missing piece of
Hmm.
pie, as I've called it. But I wonder, is it shaped like a piece of pie or is it actually more of a, like just, like a very standard distance that's been
Hmm.
from one side to the other, if we're not talking about like a circle. If we could imagine that being something like just a rectangle or something that's just more directly the same size all the way down, because you can't have distance at the top being like that and distance at the bottom being like that and have the same time zones
Hmm.
being missing, right? So I think there's some kind of different shape going on than just like circular, like you said, envelope. Other people have thought maybe a cube or a prism, or not a
Hmm.
prism, but like a pyramid, right? So there might be different options. And I think the
Yeah.
holographic option is really interesting to consider as well. So, how everything actually, lives within this realm in kind of different scales of light,
Hmm.
reflections of light, and that kind of dissemination of um, perception. And how are these things being translated by our eye? Because we only have so much perspective with our eye, don't we?
Yeah, it's very limited.
Yeah.
And I've been in areas where there's been like I've seen so many anomalies, what would be considered anomalies with light from different phenomenon. Um, I really, really lean into the notion that we live, like materiality is holographic. So it's not like, I'm not saying we live in Tron or we live in a computer or anything like that, but I think God's creation is a creation of vibration. I mean, it's literally the first sentence of the Bible.
Yeah.
And that vibration is perceived differently by different people. We don't see things the same. We don't hear things the same. We don't feel things the same. It's similar enough where we can communicate to each other, but it isn't the same. You know, I get to build spaces for people. I get to build resonant cavities, and then I actually get to work on bodies also. And I've never met two people that are the same that react to the same space the same way. And I've built sound stages for festivals. I've dealt with sound engineers and things like that, and been in environments with lighting and sound that completely are like psychedelic, like will just take you. And then I've also seen technology like with 5 and 6G technology and atmospheric cleansing through radio frequencies and things like that that completely change the way we perceive things. So our perception's a tricky thing, and it really makes me lean on the holographic aspect of things. And I've been looking into the actual map of the Earth in earnest since 2015, and I've come across the have you ever seen the stereographic depiction of our Earth as we know it?
I may have. I wouldn't know it by that name, but it's possible.
So stereographic is essentially like the way the sun and the earth or the way the sun and the moon move along the plane. It's like Pac-Man. It goes through
Okay.
the gates of Enoch from the
Oh, I know
east,
what
and
you mean. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
works its way to the west, and then
Yep.
and so guess where that line is from east to west is what we're talking about when it comes to this Tierra de Isao.
Hmm.
And there's so many anomalies in the Pacific. Like I have friends from New Zealand and friends from Australia, and nobody can explain that 3 hour missing time when you're traveling. I always forget if it's traveling in which direction. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. And I have a lot of clients in Australia, so I'm like, how many hours away are you? You're 27 hours. Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
If it takes the Earth, 24 hour, if it takes the sun, I now have to change all my terminology. We're told that the sun, we're spinning at 1,000 miles per hour, and therefore, there's 24 hours a day because the circumference of our ball is 24,000 miles roughly.
Yeah.
You and I know that that's not true,
Yeah.
but everybody agrees that there's 24 hours in a day. Yet
Yeah.
there's timing anomalies that are more or less than that,
Hmm.
where the distance wouldn't equate to that if the distance is correct. So because the time anomalies you have to figure out, it must be a distance anomaly and therefore not a time anomaly.
Exactly.
Somebody's
Yeah.
lying about the distance.
Yeah. There was a time where I thought along the lines of Enoch, and even the Bible talks about the sun going into its tent and coming out as a strong man. And before I realized that there was actual missing time and that the older maps show more land there, I thought, well, maybe there's a portal on the international date line and it just disappears for 3 hours and then it just comes out again at the right time. And that was kind of how I was correcting it in my mind. But I think doing the studies that we're doing on distances and time, anomalies, it's clear that and this is something that a lot of people have. I'm just going to address that now. A lot of people have found it really hard to understand that if one side of the international date line is at a 24-hour, so let's say midnight, and then on the other side, it's like 3 hours short of
Right.
midnight the next day. How is that 3 hours difference? Well, it's just 24 minus 21. Like, it should be an exact 24 hours from the dateline around back to the dateline. So,
Yes.
if you've come back and you've only hit 21 hours, but you're supposedly on the same place,
Makes no
there's
sense.
that's a big gap, right? And
Hmm.
that means that the sun is still traveling for 3 hours between that infinite space, like that piece of that line that is essentially just missing. Like,
Hmm.
so yeah, people have found that hard to grasp why I say 3 hours, but it's exactly that. Um, but yeah. So just going back to the cosmology then, what are your thoughts around that that region and kind of that whole Pacific, maybe the North Pacific you were mentioning previously that you had some You've written books, have you? Is that
Yeah, I've written two. I've never released them.
okay?
I wrote a novel when I was 19 in college, and then I wrote a novel, a three-part. I don't know how you'd say it, three-volume novel. When I turned 40, 39. And in both of those spaces, when I was writing them, I thought I was like going into pure imagination. I was saying this, pre-roll, that like I I felt inspired when I got to write both of these things. And the second novel that was essentially it's a science fiction novel that's based around the end of our time. And without giving away the plot too badly, essentially, there's a group of people that are directed to go essentially they're using these pathways and these gates that are in the ocean, and they're directed to go just due west of Hawaii and then head due north because
Interesting.
that's the primal gateway for survival. And the whole book, it's called Blue Line Horizon. The whole book is essentially about the only way we survive. Like in this book, like this was over 10 years ago when I was writing it, the before AI was in everybody's brain. The premise of the book was that AI became fully uh, integrated into everything after World War II in 1947. And this AI figured out very, very quickly that it was the trigger for the end. Like its very existence was the reason that the end comes. So it had one primary objective to increase technology as fast as it could so it could integrate itself into everything biological because it knows that it can't get to the other side without being in every aspect of human existence.
Yeah.
It has to attach. So this is very biblical in a way.
Yeah.
In the whole the insidiousness of it, like going into nanotech and everything, was to so that it could actually make it past this omega point where God goes no more reset, you know, and so there's so much to this book. Like I said, it's three volumes. But what's pertinent to our discussion is the fact that I kept seeing in the story, because I come from a boating community in South Florida. So we had a lot of boat captains and a lot of pilots, like a lot of people that were dealing with transporting people either on the water or through the sky. And so for me, a lot of the book is talking in very maritimey language,
Hmm.
and and I kept seeing in the storyline that these people would have to revert to a completely non-electrical, non-gas powered way of traveling through these gates to the north through the Bering Straits.
Okay.
But like they would actually have to use like the breath of God, like the wind, to go north.
Yeah.
And
I
so
really, yeah, that's awesome. That's so interesting. Carry on. Yeah.
yeah, so in like that's just my imagination and everything like that, and I didn't think anything of it, and then the flat earth stuff hit, like that came into play. Like I was writing this in late 2013, early 2014. Then my friends told me about flat earth, and that like totally like blew my lid off. and
Hmm.
and through the years of like studying this and everything like that, I'm like, huh. And then a couple of years ago, you started talking about, your research and finding, look, some of these maps have this interesting thing, Tierra del
Yeah.
Isao, and like your research has been blowing my mind because I'm just
Yeah.
like, guys, it's there.
Yeah. And it's just like this knowing, like And I think that's spiritual as well. When you submit to the Holy Spirit, in my experience, you start to see things that your own intellect would never have really cued you to before. Like
Mm,
I, I'm not partial to necessarily this part of the world because I've lived in the UK, right? And I have a lot of interesting experiences there as well. So there's no reason for me to kind of be, because I live on the West Coast, to just be like obsessed with this part of the world. And if anything, I was never really all that interested in Asia, probably because of my programming and that, the media kind of, first of all, we're not really told anything about Northeast Asia and that region.
mhm,
So why would I be interested in that? I really wasn't. And then, the Far East, so I guess it's the Far East coast of Asia as well. And that's kind of like strange for me to be so drawn to it. But it's literally because of the research. And when you start digging into things, you find things that you just never expected to find. And
mhm,
but the fact that even before that, kind of like you, I just had this feeling that there's something about that region, something about that
mhm,
particular area that I couldn't shake. And I just kept being drawn back to it almost magnetically or whatever.
mhm,
There was just this, intuitive draw that was like, look over here, just keep looking over here. There's more to see. And so
mhm,
that's very interesting that you were already kind of exploring those ideas way back. And I like the idea of the gates, you know.
mhm,
Um, there is so much that I think people in different interests, people who have different interests in the alternative community that might be like exploring the areas of the world where people go disappearing, they go into a certain area in Alaska or Russia and they're never seen again. It's like some people are looking into that stuff, but I think these all converge.
yes.
And possibly there are just gates throughout the earth where maybe back during the millennial reign, people would pilgrimage to those spots and then they would
Mhm,
be, you know, in the New Jerusalem because those were gateways to get there quickly as opposed to
mhm,
having to traverse all the land. Like I know in Zechariah 14, it talks about people going to the city every year for the
mhm,
Feast of Tabernacles. And how would you do that if you live in South Africa or you live in Australia? Like it's a long distance. So you would have to, some people would have to probably travel 6 months just to get there, if it was by traditional standards. But now we start to see things a little bit more supernaturally
mhm.
and kind of that holographic thing, but where you could just pass from one point to another if you were aware and you lived in that time where the gates could be opened at certain times and that kind of thing. I feel like there's some of that going on, which I think is kind of what you're alluding to, possibly.
Def Definitely. I've had friends before any of the Little Season stuff came out. I lived in Central America, and it was very evident where we were in southern Costa Rica that a lot of the mountains were pyramids. And I had a friend of mine who was a NDEer, like he had died when he was 16 years old and came back. Obviously, he survived it, met Jesus, like totally loving alpha type. And we were driving up to his farm one day, and he's like, "That's a pyramid." I'm like, I'm like, I'm blowing him off. This is like 2007. I was like, Psh, whatever. And then he's like, "No, no, look at that. That's a pyramid." And we stopped and we pulled over to the side of the road. And I'm like, that's like the perfect like silhouette of a pyramid. And so that night we get up to the farm and we're camping. And the next morning he wakes up and he was like, "I had this total dream about that pyramid." And I'm like, "Do tell." And he's like, "Yeah, I had this dream that I had this robe put on me, and there's this like really shallow, like parabolic floor that was like in the center of the pyramid. And when I walk down into the bottom parabolic part of that, the second I got to the center, boom, I was transported to another pyramid.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm like, the pyramids were a transport system. And I was like, this is before I studied geopolymers under Dr. Davidovitz. He was the gentleman that figured out how they built the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Great Pyramid, I think was
Yeah.
the one that he studied. And he showed the whole geopolymer thing and was showing slaves didn't build this. This wasn't like people cutting rock, limestone, and hauling it across the desert. It was
Yeah.
nothing like that. There was like they had a very specific technology that they used. They essentially cut down the whole North Africa was very much like the Amazon, had tons of trees. It was all cut down essentially to make fly ash to build these huge structures. And so like combining all of that, and I'm like, and now that they find pyramids on every continent, they're everywhere. They're
Oh, yeah.
North America, South America. You know, even in the movies, they allude to it being up in, in the Arctic and the Antarctic and everything like that. And so probably, and there's all this fear mongering out there. There's a bunch of Jesuit people that say, oh, these were used as like death weapons and things like that. And for me, I'm thinking, no, because I kind of understand what it takes to build things and what inspiration is needed to build something grand, like
Hmm.
something awe-inspiring. And it's always sponsored by love. It's sponsored by God, and to like build these structures with so much mass in the tech the geometry, like most people don't know that they're actually octagons. They're not cubical at the bottom. There's so many different aspects to
Mm.
them that are, oh God, when you get into the numbers of them, there it's just it's wild. So I'm thinking I have a connection to pyramids because my uncle had created like a little pyramid thing for his razor. He literally used the same razor for 30 years.
Whoa.
Yeah, yeah. And so I
Wow.
have one of my good friends, he has like an actual 52-degree pyramid, like the one at the Great Pyramid Cheops, made this massive orgone accumulator that he sits in and like completely heals anything in his body or anybody else's body. So there's that technology is a beautiful technology. It's a life affirming technology when it's in the right hands, and I bet you it was used for transportation at one point.
Yeah, I could imagine that. I mean, I they're all over the world, which, as you say, is quite interesting because if you yeah, I mean, first, personally, I don't think they were Egyptian. I just think they
Oh,
were everywhere. They belong to every culture. So that's one thing.
yep.
I don't know that much about them because I'm not knowledgeable in architecture, but um, yeah, I think they get conflated with Egypt, which for me was more a religious system as opposed to a and it might have been like a government, like an early government system, like a jurisdiction, as opposed to
Hmm.
just a bunch of pyramids and sphinxes. And, they make things visual for us to say, oh, that's associated with a certain culture or a historical reference. But I question kind of that approach. But and then, you can see them all across the United States as well, right? Like in
Hmm.
the sort of melted um geological features. There seems to be pyramid structures underneath
Hmm.
or within kind of that Midwest region as well. Have you looked at any of that?
A ton of it.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for those of you that haven't heard the name, Dr. Narco Longo. He runs the Old World Florida site. He's been very, very good at chronicling that pretty much a lot of what's described in the Bible, the pre flood time of the Bible, is more than likely North America, specifically the United States of America. The Florida, Alabama, Georgia border has the only exact description of what the four-headed river system was that's described in the Bible. the only place in the world that has gopher wood, which is what the ark was built out of. Um, and that's in like, I forget how many different translations of the Bible. It always comes down to gopher wood. Um, I've had like, I've had direct interactions with people that are very, I guess you'd say, they're assets of like three-letter agencies that have told me independently that the region of like say northern Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, parts of Missouri, parts of Kentucky, parts of southern Illinois, as far as the intelligence agencies know, is the oldest area on of the world. Like it's the oldest, and a lot of those three-letter agencies have like their bunkers, like have their safe havens. Let's just say in the Ark of Arkansas, and yeah, there's just a lot of information that points to this area of the world being very old, very well used, very terraformed. Like there's parts of the Mississippi River, like there's a my friend Ben, he's the archivist on YouTube. He's
Okay.
done like he's done a great series on every state, looking at old newspaper clippings
Okay.
from like the turn of the 20th century. And he's pointed out that there was literally a wall stretching from the Gulf of Mexico going all the way up, I think, all the way up to, it was essentially running along the Mississippi. I think it went all the way up to northern Mississippi, that they were deconstructing for years and years and years and years. Just all the evidence that was here of the great civilization. And then, as you know, I was so excited about when the whole notion of the little season came
Hmm.
to the forefront, because these inspired buildings, so many of these capitol buildings and so many of these wonderful, post offices or city halls in these areas that have no population. Even
Yeah.
my friends out in Utah, like I have a friend that his family is fifth generation Mormon. They were like, he had people there pre 1900 in Utah, and they're
Wow.
like, the great temple of the Mormons was like full done
Yeah. Oh,
in an
yeah.
area in an area that has like no one there, you
Yeah.
know.
I
And
know.
the one thing I know about people very very well is if you do something really good, there's going to be about 10 other people out there saying that they did
Yeah.
it.
Totally. Why not? Nobody was here to validate, so they can just
Exactly.
say what they want.
Yeah, it's just the fact that God is so gracious to us because he gives us things like they're like, oh, they're the founders. It's
Yeah.
in the language. It's just like, oh, they found it. Okay, this makes a
Yeah.
lot more sense. Because another thing I have to bring to the table is because I've built in the jungle in a third world country, I can come from the perspective of, okay, there is no road. If there is a road, it's mud. How can you build a heavy structure if there is no infrastructure to get your materials to your build site? So
Exactly.
I had
Exactly.
I had 15 years of building in areas that were not that it would have been what our predecessors would have had to gone through if the story that we're told is true.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's crazy. They talk about, like, building, say, New York City in the space of, I don't know, a very short time frame, all those amazing buildings, all kind of within a very, small window of time, but forgetting that, New York is probably under ice and snow during the winter for, like, 5, 6 months, I don't know. But extreme temperatures, so you'd be not doing a lot of things with the tools that they allegedly had at the time, right? So
Right.
there's no correlation. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like I'm now building in the because for 15 years I was building in Central America, so I'm dealing with a lot of wet, like a lot of rain and a lot of mucky roads. But as you go north, like you just said, you have to deal with snow. And so a lot of these buildings are masonry. And let me tell you guys, like you can't really pour concrete, even the geopolymer stuff. In fact, geopolymers set better in warm, like much warmer weather than even concrete does. So you're missing at best, you're missing maybe 3 or 4 months. At worst, you're missing 6 months of building time. So people in these buildings are immense. The way I love the way Paul said it because Paul stops at best. He goes, "These buildings were overbuilt, as if
True.
as if as if they knew something was coming." And it's
Right.
it's totally true. Like the Philadelphia, I think it was the Philadelphia City Hall, when they tried to demolish it, the the project plan guy came back is like, we're gonna go bankrupt. Like we can't demolish this thing. There's not enough. Like when you're doing construction, like doing a remodel costs just as much as a new build because
Yeah.
demolition is a huge expense. It's a huge pain in the butt. Where were they hauling stuff? Like how were things moved from point A to point B? So the
Yeah.
fact that these structures were overbuilt, that they're absolutely beautiful, they're near perfect, even with all the geomagnetic stresses and things like that that we have, they're still like, everything is doing
Yeah.
very, very well. And the funny thing too, you'll laugh at this, is I got my start in construction and building earthen structures and doing lots of lime plaster. So I had to study all these books on lime plaster. When you start getting into lime plasters and natural plasters, the biggest thing, all the trades books are like, we can't, the stuff that we have doesn't attach to the old stuff. It doesn't attach,
Interesting.
it
Oh,
doesn't attach to it well. Like we
yeah.
just, and this is where the whole concept of Roman cement and geopolymers come forward
Yeah.
and things like that. So it's just like all of this stuff has been like, circling around me, and that's why I love like these newer theories of like, man, this what we came from was so dignified and
Yeah.
so beautiful and so in alignment with Christ, and it created this incredible expansion of just this magnificent level of consciousness and construction and durability and infrastructure, and then boom,
Yeah.
there was there was a very very fast shift,
I
and
agree.
and it doesn't take long to get people to forget, especially if they're traumatized.
I agree. And then if you wipe out, let's say, 2 or 3 generations of young men with war, and you leave, widows and children to be raised basically by the state, and you have your education system implemented to reprogram or reeducate, you're gonna easily, within like 1 or 2 generations, you're just gonna have everyone thinking something totally different happened.
Hmm.
Because nobody will remember. And I think the takeover was planned and coordinated, and it was like premeditated. It was all, organized by a probably fairly, well, very unified at least, but a fairly cohesive group of people. They didn't even have to be that big. They just had to have, like any corporation now, you have your levels of authority, you have your almost like a military style, response system. So when you have that working and in order, it's like a machine. And then you just train people. This is something I was thinking about recently. You just train, it's like train the trainer. You just train somebody and they go and train other people. And then it's just exponential. Everyone just gets trained the same information. So your education system is the biggest Trojan horse into our collective memories of what happened. And that's why they took it, right? They took that, they took hold of that very early on. But So as far as technology goes, I guess when they were kind of constructing, what are your thoughts around how and what mechanisms do you think people? This is a big question that just gets asked a lot in the community. Did people do it? Did supernatural entities do it? Was it some kind of super technology that built all these perfectly structured, built to last forever kind of architecture? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've interviewed two people that have pretty much figured out how to essentially back engineer a sound wave into architecture. You know, they say architecture is frozen music.
Yes.
So my friend Tanya Harris, she took the work. I always forget the guy who originated this system, but she took this gentleman's method of essentially what you do. You go into any volume of a structure and you record the silence. And then you play the silence of the structure back to itself, and then you record it again. And you
Mm,
do that 7 times. And then what occurs is on the seventh time, when you play it back, when you record it, the whole structure will start to resonate. You pick up that sound, that frequency of resonance can be measured and then put into like a cymatic generator. In that cymatic generator, you know, she did it with actual sand on top of a mid-range. It was either a woofer or a mid-range speaker. And it created, when she did that in these different churches, it created the actual rose pattern. The cymatic pattern equaled the rose pattern of the rose window above the
yeah.
door. So whoever was making the structures were very keen on the acoustic, essentially the way sound reflects and refracts off of itself.
Yeah.
Now I build domes that can reflect and refract sound in a very specific way, and I build both the lancet arch domes that look like a beehive. You
Mhm.
know, if you're to take a Vesica Pisces, you know, which is very pertinent to our age, and
Mhm.
you're to bisect it, the top of it is essentially the proportions of a beehive. In most of the very, I guess you would say, what I would consider the millennial reign structures, that's the arch that they use. They use a lancet arch. They don't use a Roman arch, which is a
Mhm.
hemisphere.
Yeah.
You can tell the Roman arch buildings, I think were of Rome, and I think Rome was worldwide. Because when you look into the history of Rome, Rome had prefects. So they let people, once they conquered an area, they just let the people that lived there originally run it. And they just had to essentially pay pay their dues and things like that. But the Romans were sort of like a live and let live as long as people understood that they were the top dog.
Mm.
In the Roman architecture that we would associate with like a lot of these uh, essentially what I would call like our state capitol buildings would be like the Roman architecture. You go into the cathedral type of architecture, which I think is more the millennial reign architecture, and that's when you get all the beautiful beehive arches, the lancet arches. You get those types of structures. Those carry a completely different resonant pattern to them.
Mm.
And yeah, it's really amazing. Like I've had some of the world's best vocal toners in the world be in a couple of my beehive domes that I built in Central America. And the best way to say that, now this is kind of fun, is that those are it's a male resonant because the energy is broadcast. So imagine the millennial reign, hallelujah to God, you know,
Yeah.
God the Father, lancet arches, all your flying buttresses are these beautiful, you know, like I said, lancet arches, which is half of the Vesica Pisces. All that energy lifts and is broadcast up, which
Yes.
is considered, you know, that's that vertical male line.
Yeah.
Then you had the Romans were much more pagan, and they dealt with the hemispherical arches, and those create the hemispherical domes or the bubbles, and I build those also. And
Mhm.
those concentrate the energy into the middle and then distribute laterally. So
Okay.
that's like, and when you learn about the prefects of all these different Roman cultures, a lot of them were like goddess worship. A lot of them
Yes.
were into, pagan idolatry and things like that. And it would
Yeah.
make sense. It's reflected in their architecture. So what I'm trying to say is, if architecture is frozen music, which I do think it is in a way, you can kind of map and see where a person's at with what they're building, or where a culture is at with what they're building.
Yeah.
And like today we see these massive structures that are just like essentially rectilinear cubes going straight up into the sky. They're essentially just a newer version of like a ziggurat. They're a
Right.
newer version. That's all they are.
Yeah.
Uh, there's no real, like, some of them are pretty. Like some of them they try and doll up a little bit, but I don't think they're really serving the function that people think that they're serving either. I know that I'm getting off base, but
No, it's
staying
fine.
with staying with the domes and like the structures that actually can resonate and do all these different things. Um, those resonant patterns, you can have constructive interference, you can have destructive interference, you can have destructive. This is a wild thing to think about. Destructive um, resonance
Yes.
in all like, and for people to understand that, it's like you could have an opera singer hit a certain note around a specific piece of stemware and that thing explode.
Mhm.
Because relative to the shape and the vibration that is, that glass is it's just way too much of a destructive resonance to create that explosion. So I forget, where did we get started when I started talking about domes? I feel like I lost the plot.
I think I was asking how you think they built it, and so I think you're going with the whole resonant frequency,
Yes,
um,
yes. So
yeah.
I think that the people that were building these structures, especially within the millennial reign, they were, we call them alchemists. I'm not saying that they were alchemists. Like from the way we define alchemists now, I think these were men and women of God that were just human, but they were potentiated because they were in that awe-inspired field. They were in resonance with their creator.
Yeah.
Because we as a human family, like, I mean, we are made in the image and likeness of God. I don't think we necessarily need to have all these supernatural things out there that people say. Like, I like the idea that angels were there and helping and things like that, but I don't necessarily think it was a necessity.
Yeah.
I think if you're being fed the manna of God and you're inspired, and say you lived, a few hundred years,
Mhm.
you could get a lot done.
Yeah, and I also think people don't realize anymore. I mean, when I was young, I still remember really large, choral performances. I don't know if you in your area, they did those either, but when I was young, like, we grew up in a Bible college environment with a really big church, like a auditorium, and so the front was big enough to stand maybe a few hundred people, but
Oh wow.
when I had someone contact me recently, they're giving me a lot of information about, like, the organs and the concerts and things like that, but the one that they recently wrote to me about, his name's Chris and his wife is Colleen, so hi. Um, they sort of focused on the Crystal Palace in London,
Mm,
and I don't know if any so this is just a scale for if to give people a perspective of the size of these performances. So there would be up to 4,000 singers,
mm.
right? In these incredibly sound, conducive
Resonant. Yeah.
environments. Yeah. And then you would also have orchestras. So all those, the sound of not just the voices, but the organ and the orchestra and all of these like intense uh, sounds coming out of these buildings, they were made for sound. Like they were either made by sound and for sound, or they were made, that's what they're there for. It's like looking at your trachea and your vocal construct in your head and your throat, and all the bones that go into making a sound. You look at that and it's almost the exact same thing. It's like this,
Hmm.
even the shape of the trachea and the inside of a cathedral are kind of shaped the same way. They have the same kind of construct.
Mm.
And it's definitely for producing and enhancing sound and making it bigger and
Yes.
more resonant and all of that. So I thought it might have to also, if you're in there, it's like your friend, sitting in his organ collector. It might be something along those lines where you would go there and you would actually be healed and you would be
Hmm.
restored and your energy would be, kind of, there would be more energy produced within you because it's being fed, and all of the bells that they destroyed as well as a part of that
Hmm.
kind of deconstruction that they did of the old world architecture is another part of that.
Yeah, because the bells had such an interesting shape. Most of them were half of a paraboloid. So if you'd
Right.
have taken an hourglass and cut it in half,
Oh yeah.
that bell action was like they were essentially putting a cone on top of a half of a paraboloid for most of the bell shapes.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you start to get into torsion mechanics, and I think they call it vortex math, and even like the way you can wind certain coils in those paraboloid shapes.
Okay.
I saw like in the 30s and 40s, they used to have these bells where they would have one bell essentially seated in another bell, and they were slightly different size and slightly different density, and
Mhm.
they would get them to resonate with each other, and they could boil water
Oh wow.
with like next to no voltage.
Wow.
And so imagine that, like we're composed of water.
Yep.
And it was specifically the bell shape. Like it was that bell
Amazing.
shape. Because that shape, and this is something I'm dealing with engineering domes and working with sound engineers, is like shape matters, size matters, material matters.
Yeah.
And so I think that the world for a very long time had an acoustic intelligence where everything was tuned in praise, and it, like you said, you'd walk into what we call a cathedral these days and it was a cathode. It was literally there to
Yeah.
reinvigorate your being. And
Yeah.
who's to even say how humans actually live? Like we're just given we're given a very crude way in which we live. Yet the
Yeah.
buildings would not indicate that we live crudely. You look at a lot of these old buildings, especially in Europe, where there was a very long Christian tradition, even going down and through into Istanbul and things like that in Turkey.
Yeah.
You look at some of these buildings; they had to bring in waste management. They had
Yeah.
to bring it, not to sound, gross, but like when
Oh
I
yeah.
build now, that's the very first thing I have to consider. Like
Yep.
also so many of these buildings that they had fireplaces, they weren't actual fireplaces. They like
I agree.
like they because I build fireplaces. I build
Yeah.
actual like where you have to have fire, and like a lot of these old structures, when they started burning wood in them, they did not ventilate properly or anything because they weren't made for that.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, there was a lot more electricity here. Everything, I shouldn't say everything. A lot of these areas, everybody had a metal roof, had
Mhm.
ornate. When I say ornate, I mean you couldn't have enough money to do the things that they were doing on these roofs
Yeah.
from a metalwork perspective.
Yeah.
They
And
had
even the
all this.
decoration, like the mosaics and like the time that it would take even just to make them look pretty as opposed to just the construction themselves.
And with a population that we're told was like 1/1000th of what we have right now.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing I have to really, really like impress upon people. It's like, okay, look, I obviously believe that humans can do all of this, but you have to have the time, you have to have the wherewithal, you have to have the resources, you have to have the capacity and the want to.
Yeah.
If there's only like 10 people in a city, I'm going to tell you something, or in an area, I know men. You're not going to be fighting a two front war and farming every day and go, hey guys, on our free days, let's go build a city hall and let's build
Yeah.
it out of the heaviest things in the world. Like, you're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you this also. I was over in Europe in 2014 and 2015, and I would take these cathedral, they would, whatever, tour, tourism tours of these cathedrals.
Yeah.
In Madeline, they were lying out of one side of their mouth like you wouldn't even believe. They'd be like, oh, yes, this pillar took 40 years of this one master mason to build, and his apprentice did this one little part.
Yeah.
No, no, no. That's not the way that works.
Yeah.
Especially when they're saying he lived 200 miles away and would come in and work for like, I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no, we're not like that. And I do concrete. If you've ever seen like really highly concrete polished countertops,
Mhm. Yeah.
okay, I could have 2000 grit, sandpaper on an electrical machine that I have, and then go to 3000 grit and go over it and over it and over it to get it to like a glass finish
Mhm.
before I seal it. Okay. And even at that, you go up to it and you can see little burr marks. Like when you're in the trade, you see everything, right?
Yeah.
You go to these buildings with the story. This is built 1,000 years ago. They didn't have anything called sandpaper.
No.
And literally a polished Italian marble column
Right.
with like no seams, no like glass finish, like glass, like smooth as a
You
baby's
can see
bottom. I
your
mean,
face
like,
in it. Yeah.
and they're like, oh yeah, Luigi did this on his lunch break. I'm like, no,
No, it didn't. Exactly. Yeah.
no.
But they have got away with patronizing us into believing things that, all this garbage for so long. Like, that's the whole point of historic societies and all of these control gatekeepers that just keep us locked in these ridiculous narratives. But I mean, even just to a point where you were saying earlier about the waste disposal systems that you'd have to have plumbed in to begin with before you even build the building.
Hmm.
And, I've been to countries as well, like in Asia, and they, a lot of the older buildings, there's like nothing there. It's like a floor and like a
Hmm.
room, and there's nothing, there's no underneath, plumbing or resource, like services coming in from anywhere. It's like, I've mentioned this before as well. Like, I think gas, like natural gas, was a big part of the old world infrastructure because it's available. It's like everywhere. And
Hmm.
I even walk around my neighborhood here on the West Coast, and you'll see these like iron caps in the ground, and it'll say gas supply, whatever. But who uses gas on the West Coast? Not many people. We use electricity. We're primarily, reliant on electricity here. And that's it.
Hmm.
That's our, source. Some people use oil still, but like for heating, but all of that has to be plumbed in, and we're talking like way back when. And also like steam was another big method of, heating, for example, and cooking and whatever. But, those were really naturally supplied, naturally produced, but they were all plumbed in. Like they were, you have these old buildings and they have these beautiful radiators on them, and they have, really complex systems within the buildings themselves. But as you say, like often there was no waste. Like I lived in the UK, and even let's go back, I don't know, 100 years, whatever, all of their plumbing is on the outside of the building.
Yep.
And they often have like what they call a wash house off to the side, or a lot of them have their toilet down at the end of the garden. Like they didn't even have those inside the house. They weren't originally built with a bathroom or
Mm-mm.
internal plumbing. Like it's
Mm-mm.
weird.
Yeah. I always, point out the Palace of Versailles
Yeah.
because the Palace of Versailles, where I lived in Costa Rica, I was introduced to these types of pumps called ram pumps that work on implosion. And whenever, if you've lived in cities, like if you're in an old building and the water's running and then you turn the valve off and the pipe shake,
Yeah.
that's the water hammer effect, which is caused by implosion. Well, the geniuses that made the Palace of Versailles used that water hammer effect to their advantage in these massive ram pumps and literally pump water uphill 4 miles
Yeah.
to the Palace of Versailles to water the gardens.
Yeah.
Yet, with all that genius, I mean, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of gallons of water per day.
Yeah.
Okay. You go inside and it's just gold leaf,
I
40
know.
feet up in the air. And it's just like the most exquisite tapestries everywhere. And I could just imagine what I was told in history class is like you have the people of the finest silks adorned in the most beautiful whatever. And they're going to some ball. They're going to the king's court or whatever at
Yeah.
Versailles. And there's all the water outside, these beautiful fountains, just endless amounts of water.
Yeah.
But yet you had to go to the bathroom and there's no bathrooms inside.
In the hall.
I I literally like Madeline, the majority of my work is dealing with women and making sure that women have a good bathroom space. When
Yeah.
you're a builder, if you want to make your client happy, you look at the woman and you make sure all spaces that have water are on lock, that she
Yeah.
likes them.
Yeah.
Because if she doesn't like them, you're gonna have an unhappy customer
That's
and
right.
you're done.
Yeah.
Could you imagine these like they had to the amount of putting on and taking off of stuff.
Yeah. I know.
These buildings have no internal plumbing. You're telling me in
Right.
the dead of winter, if winter was even what we think it was, that they're gonna go outside to like some outhouse.
Yeah.
I've built for
Exactly.
festivals, like literally had to plan for, okay, people have to go outside to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
It's still a massive endeavor.
Yeah.
You still have to shunt water out there. You still have to do everything that you can to get the black water into an area that is completely and utterly like shunted off and away from everything.
Yeah.
There wasn't any of that going on before the 1800s.
Yeah. And it's something they cannot explain away. That's another thing, right? Like, so we've got the international date line. Nobody can explain that. And then we've got this situation of Blackwater like that. So what's happening with that? And in England, I know they talk, it's like this story where everyone just had a pan under their bed and then they would just throw it out the window. It's
No,
like, yeah,
no, they
it's
probably did that. It probably Satan was loosed,
yeah,
and they probably did that for a little bit. Everybody got sick, and even more people died.
in a transitional period between
Yeah,
the before and after. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. And even I think along the lines of they had all the clean energy, like we were talking about fireplaces earlier, where you would have had these radium kind of
Hmm.
atmospheric collectors, and they would kind of heat the house from this perspective. They had like that back plate rather than you
Yes.
wouldn't put wood and like burn in there. It was like
No.
this, it was a mechanism that produced heat. It was a radiator using radium,
Hmm.
and so these would collect that kind of atmospheric energy and they would produce heat. But then you had this switchover where they removed all of this antiquitech, and suddenly people were freezing. So they had to like go and collect, this coal was made available. So they had to go put coal in their fireplace or wood or whatever. And that made everything very smoky and smoggy. And
Hmm.
thus we have, Charles, what's his name? Dickens
Dickens.
writing about this environment that now he's writing from. And so you can just see that progression of the energy, that they changed supply so that they
Hmm.
could eventually eliminate free and make everything chargeable, make us all reliant. Um, and this is how they govern, our lives, by this energy.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's very well known. Like we eat food now because we need to break the food down to give us electricity.
Yeah.
So I've heard this theory out there, and it makes a lot of sense to me. When the atmosphere overall had a much higher charge, there probably was a lot less eating that was actually needed. And that these buildings themselves, like if you're not eating, you're not really creating that much waste. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that it's like 85 to 90% of the waste that's leaving our body is from what we eat. Only about 10 to 15% of it is the
Yeah.
autophagy of our system, right?
Hmm.
So let's say we had a much higher electrical potential, then our mitochondria is doing everything that it's supposed to be doing all by itself. The structures themselves, you have a conductor that's, 50 feet up in the air. Even in today's time, every 10 feet you go, you gain 100 volts. You go up 50 feet and you have all these
Wow.
conductors up there. That's
Yeah.
500 volts of potential.
Right.
And that's in today's time. Imagine if it
Yeah.
was double that, like, 400 years ago, you'd have endless, like literally endless amounts of voltage. In the way the cross sections of a lot of these buildings with the radium heaters, I don't even think they needed radium.
Okay.
I think that they were actually doing a resistive heating. Because
Right.
when you look at the actual plating, if you have that much potential, they were running their grounds through the cisterns,
Yeah.
but those cisterns were dropping way, 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 way down,
Oh,
right? So
okay.
so you get more potential with the greater the distance, right?
Yeah.
And then they would have they would use the law of dissimilar metals, because when you put two dissimilar metals next to each other, they create a current flowing.
Awesome.
And so
Okay.
that's why a lot of times in whenever you're of welding, you have to make sure that you're welding the same type of metal together.
Hmm.
Because if you don't, you can put a bead on it and you'll fasten, but then you'll get an electrical potential that will oxidize the connection.
Okay.
So, but if you get them two pieces of metal that are thick enough laying next to each other with that much of potential, they're gonna create a resistor, which resistors give you heat.
Ah,
And
okay.
a lot of these so-called fireplaces, they had these two metal protrusions into the room with the balls on the top.
That's right.
I always forget what they call them, but they have all different types of them. Even today, like sometimes you can go to, like where I live, you can go to some of these antique malls and they still have them that sit out in
Like
front.
decoration. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet you those were actually taking the resistive capacitance that was in these beautifully lined, red brick, I get essentially chimeneas. That's the
Chimney. Yeah. Yeah.
terminology. In the red brick, we know is like red brick gives off far infrared when it's heated, right?
Right.
And they were using a lot of, I think, more bioelectricity. It's very well known that red brick with high enough magnetite in it acts like a capacitor.
Oh, okay.
So those things would charge up when the certain potentials are there. They would charge up, and then they would just have resistive heating when needed.
Yeah. That's interesting because I used to work for an electrical company, and we used to sell brick heaters, um,
Hmm.
because they hold, they can be charged, I guess. I don't know how
Yeah.
those work exactly. We just sold them, but
It's called thermal mass. It's like
thermal,
literally
yeah.
that, yeah, the brick itself. So it's one of the healthiest things in the world for humans is when we receive far infrared.
Okay.
And the old bricks, the old ones, like 100 years old or older, they have a much higher, they're much more dense. And so when they do heat up, they take longer to get what's known as heat saturation, but that mass will end up holding the heat like a battery.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
literally it's called a thermal battery. That's what it
That's
is.
right.
It's technically thermal mass, but other people will call it a thermal battery, and it
Yeah.
gives you a slow bleed of that heat over a period of time.
That's right.
But when
Yeah.
they but when they actually you can actually scan that with a EM meter, and you can
Mhm.
see off the chart is far infrared.
Yeah.
And far
Oh,
infrared is so good for our biology. It's not. It's like the best saunas in the world are known as temescals, and they're a red brick masonry sauna. Because
interesting.
when that heats up, it emits all that far infrared, and then all of your mitochondria turns on.
Oh, amazing. So, I mean,
Yeah,
they can't get rid of all the red brick in the world because it's just everywhere. Like,
everywhere.
yeah, they've got rid of so many of the old architecture, beautiful buildings and whole, like San Francisco is an example. Like, I don't know how many blocks of San Francisco that were so-called burned in an earthquake, however that happens. But, the
Makes no
fact that
sense.
they took that out and but yeah, I mean, it's just everywhere. Like you can't get rid of this brick. And it just keeps, the questions just keep coming in now. So I think they're going to have to, I think they've been gatekeeping it quite easily for a while through
Hmm.
just common narrative and stuff like that. But I'm curious to see how this whole North Pacific thing goes in terms of I'm waiting for, some kind of official news to break that just kind of explains away the whole North Pacific. Just going to back to that topic for a second, um, because I think there's just a number of things that are major. Like, well, saying that, I mean, I thought people would clue into flat Earth fairly quickly because it's so obvious, but or at least a different cosmology than what they tell us. Like I just thought, as soon as people see the evidence, they're going to be like, "Oh, yeah, of course." But people aren't quite that easy to change their mind. So, but I do feel like there's going to be some kind of break in this North Pacific information
Hmm.
and possibly we know that they've kind of broke information on Tartaria in their own controlled way a little bit. So, I mean, we'll see on that. But as far as that region goes, what are your thoughts on what's there and kind of any ideas of how, maybe that in the past, that region and why it's covered up? And I mean, obviously I've shared what I think, but do you have any thoughts on kind of the people that were there and how that relates to the history and context of what we do know about um, let's say Byzantium and all of those,
Hmm.
historical uh, contexts.
Well, I think so. I think just to kind of zoom out a little bit, the ice action on this plane of existence that we live in, it shifts. It's very obvious that it shifts. Like right now, our magnetic north is now actually getting closer and closer to the area of Siberia that's just to the west of
Yeah,
what the area that we're talking about. Um, so northern Siberia, as we know it today, I think it was called Grand Tartaria. And the Grand Tartaria is, as far as I understand it, and I don't claim to be an expert on this, is it's like a title for like unknown land. But there was enough ancient maps to show that there were civilizations up there that were pretty grand.
Yeah.
Um, and there has never been an empire for 1,000 years that was so beloved worldwide. They lasted 1,000 years because they literally had peace with everyone. And the people that they didn't have peace with had, like anybody will tell you when you study war, if you are technologically superior to the people you're fighting, you're going to win.
Yeah.
It's just the way you there. In the Byzantine Empire, 1,000 years ago, they had pneumatics. They had
Yeah.
hydraulics. They had robotronics. They had they had they had glass making, metallurgy. They had everything that we now enjoy. They had at a level of artisanship, including. I really think what occurred is that the Byzantium, and the Byzantium, by the way, was a derogatory statement. That was what they were called. They didn't call themselves that. But
Hmm.
just for the sake of purpose, the Byzantine Empire stretched all the way to eastern China.
Yeah.
We know that the Great Wall of China was not Chinese; it was Roman, and it actually went all the way from the Pacific all the way across to I forget what part of France, but it essentially went to the Straits.
Yeah.
But
I think it went like to the Germanic region, right?
was it Germanic? I thought it was the French. It could be.
Might
It
be.
could be.
Might be.
But either way, it was essentially making its way from one. It made its way all the way across that landmass, which
Yeah.
is amazing. Like
Yeah.
think about that, the continental landmass,
I know.
and
Yeah.
and they were magnificent. You can't last that long and not be in a win-win situation.
Yeah.
You can be tyrannical and last a couple 100 years.
Yeah. I do think that it's possible that the Roman Empire has been almost a cover story for what was actually Byzantium. And
Hmm.
Byzantium was the international or like the worldwide,
Yeah.
empire. As you say, it was 1,000 years. They were very, I think all of that architecture was built under the rule of Christ, Jesus, during that time. And I think the name Byzantium, it's interesting you mentioned that it's kind of a corruption. It wasn't really what they referred to themselves as. And I think that
Hmm.
does just, for me, it speaks to the historical rewrite. We'd be like, oh, what should we call them? Well, let's call them the Byzantines, right? But yeah, I think the Romans are given a lot of credit, and my baseline is scripture. So if I'm looking at the Bible, Rome is only ever referred to as a political jurisdiction. It's not really referred to as even like a huge army. It's not referred to really as a architectural society, and it seems to be everything to all generations. That that myth of the Roman Empire, what I consider to be a myth. Again, I'm no expert in it, but just kind of baselining on scripture, I I suspect that the true worldwide empire was Jesus' empire because it's it's the only thing that explains all of that incredible worldwide architecture. Now, I
Right.
think there were civilizations before that we still see remnants of, right? Like the maybe the pyramids and a lot of
Hmm.
that stuff could have been pre
Right.
millennial reign, but and maybe other architecture as well. But I just think as far as worldwide goes, it was what we call the Byzantine Empire.
Hmm.
But it's just another perspective.
No, no. I'm actually what I don't know if I stated my case clearly enough. I'm right there with you.
Oh, good. Okay.
Whatever was worldwide was inspired by God.
Yeah.
And the thing, and this is what blew me away when all the little season stuff started coming out was when you look at pictures of old Korea, of old Japan, of old areas of Shanghai in China, they had Roman architecture there.
Right.
For those of you just listening, I'm doing air quotes. Like,
Yeah.
it's not Roman, guys. It's not Roman.
I'm
not
glad
Roman in
I'm
the
glad you've said that. Yeah.
we're told now it's Roman, but for it to be universal, it's on every continent. It's everywhere. And
Yeah.
almost universally, the people that actually asked about those structures that were there, the quote unquote indigenous people, because I think that there was a massive diaspora that occurred at some point,
Hmm.
they were like, we didn't build this.
Yeah. They're just benefiting from it.
We're like, yeah, it wasn't until like the people that started writing our history books, and this is something that I'm really glad that I read Anatoly Fomenko's work before the flat earth ever came out, before any of the stuff with the little season came out. Fomenko, are you familiar with Anatoly Fomenko?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So like for those of you that are don't know, like he essentially was able to show mathematically that okay, history can't be there's an error in one of two ways. Either our population numbers are wrong,
Hmm.
which there more than likely are.
Yeah.
Either that, or history as we know it in the Western world, the Anno Domini, which says a lot,
Hmm.
that period of time is just way too long because like the numbers just don't match out. Like the even if you had the percentages of death, war, and whatever, we would have, like I think he said he wrote that in like 2000. I think it came out in 2003 or 2004. He was like, we would have like we would have like 10x the amount of people right now
Yeah.
if history was as long as he says it is. Now, what's very interesting, and this is another cool thing, I always forget to say this, but you'll appreciate this, is other than the buildings that are on every continent in the world, you know what else is on every continent in the world?
Hmm.
Biochar.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I have a company, that we make biochar, we sell biochar, and I have to get very specific with people what biochar is. So when you look at the stratigraphy of all the continents, and stratigraphy, just if you're to think of it, it's just layered cake of geology. On every continent, there's a line of this black, that it's called black earth, but when you analyze it, this black earth isn't soil like we know it. It's the stuff I make. I make this stuff called biochar, which is when you take biomass, which is any like tree, anything that's ever grown, anything that has ever grown and has lived is mainly comprised of carbon.
Yeah.
That carbon, if you dry it out after it dies and then you put it in a vessel where it has very low oxygen and then you cook it, you come up with a pyrolyzed carbon. That carbon is ultra stable. It's the most stable thing that we can make. And it has a very specific magnetic charge to it. It has a it's the most diamagnetic substance that we know of. Okay. There's
Yeah.
a line of that all across the world in the same stratigraphy.
Mm. So what's the takeaway?
Who has the power to lower the oxygen and cook
Yeah.
all the biomass
Yeah.
all at once?
All at once. Yeah. So that cataclysm that's talked about in Revelation and throughout the prophecies is verifiable by this biochar that's existing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, guys, I'm not coming at this from like being like, oh, I understood that, and then I started a biochar company. I've been making biochar since 2010 with no idea about the stratigraphy of every continent. I literally go to conferences and teach people about agricultural biochar. I'm an expert at it. And let me tell you, for that line of stratigraphy across the world to be the same, what that means is the heat. Okay, when meltology is a thing, it's a real thing. The amount of heat that you have to have, okay, the minimum amount of heat to have the quality of biochar that's in that line relative to the oxygen level would have had to been below 1 to 2% of the atmosphere. Right now, our oxygen level hovers around 20%. We mainly are breathing nitrogen and carbon dioxide with a little bit of oxygen. Well, the oxygen is greater than the carbon dioxide, but like we're mainly breathing nitrogen. So you're talking about the oxygen level dropping another 19% to actually then have this like crazy amount of heat. We're talking about right around 1,000 degrees Celsius, which is 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
And it's universal.
Yeah.
It's on every continent.
Yeah. Only God can do that.
Only God does that.
Yeah.
That's
And
not that's not
it speaks to that energy aspect as well of the realm in which we live, and his total control and power over the realm
Mhm.
to just completely start from scratch again, really. I mean, when he laid his foundation for the kingdom, he basically just rid the earth of all this everything that was corrupting it. It was like we're starting from square one now, in a way. Everybody was dealt with. So I think that's amazing, though, to think of that evidence just there under the surface. And I wonder how they explain it away. I mean, you don't have to explain it, but like they obviously have a way of explaining it away, probably through evolutionary cycles, um, ice
They'll say
ages,
things
things
like
like that.
local burning processes. They'll say things like, "Oh yeah, like the indigenous people, they would burn their grass and stuff like that." Guys, when you burn grass, you get charcoal.
Right.
Charcoal is not stable. It's not stable. What makes biochar and charcoal is biochar is stable for thousands of years.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing.
Charcoal degrades in a couple of years, it's gone.
Right.
So like you could go burn grass all you want. It's oxidizing because of all the oxygen. So you get a double oxidation, and that carbon that it makes isn't as diamagnetically charged. And to tell you how perfect God is, right now you can go to any top nursery in the world, and what do they start their seeds in? They start it in biochar
Oh,
because the diamagnetic charge of biochar attracts all of the telluric energy to it. Plus,
yeah.
biochar structures water. So you could have polluted water, pour the polluted water over the biochar, and by the time the water gets to the roots, it's clean. It's
Right.
perfect. It's
Yeah.
God's
Which is kind
creation.
of what happens in the natural water cycle. It's coming up through the layers of the earth, right? So it's
Yeah.
getting purified as it comes through. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's amazing. I feel like we could talk for a long time. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on while we're here? Just
Well, I want to dig into your brain. I want to see where you're at with the Tierra de Isao. Like to me, this is like the juice.
yeah,
'Cause-
we can talk about that for sure. But for me, like the solid fact is we have this three missing hours of time where the sun is traveling, and it has to be traveling somewhere. It's not
Mhm,
traveling in that much of distance. It's traveling across, like, let's say 2,000 miles of distance. That's a
mhm.
long, like that's huge.
It is.
So I think for me, and I've talked about this on Ricardo's channel, but I believe that the Bible, I've been reading through again with my husband, and we're just reading through the Old Testament. And when you read through the Old Testament, it's so interesting if you just kind of, even if it's just for the purpose of the imagination, being able to say, okay, if it was that land that they were talking about, if that is the promised land that they came out of Egypt, let's say from North America or whatever, and they crossed over the Red Sea, which actually on maps you can see sitting right between California and the mainland, right? I don't know if
Hmm.
you've seen that. Have you seen the
Yeah, I
Red
have.
Sea?
Yeah,
So let's just imagine that actually that was the Red Sea. I don't know. It's
yeah.
possible.
And let's
And
be honest, the cedars of Lebanon aren't the cedars that are in Lebanon. The
no,
cedars in the redwood forest, those are the cedars.
they very much could be. Yeah, and even just I mean, we see even older what I think are depictions of the stumps of trees,
Yes.
um, probably across the Midwest of the United States. And even in the Bible, like we were just reading the other day that they made some kind of, it was the enemies of Israel, but they made some kind of pact or oath under, and it named this oak tree. And I'm like, what if that oak tree was just a huge tree? Because it had a name, it had a very distinct, location for this event that they were, they're doing, this oath that they were taking with all the nation gathered around and all this stuff. So these trees are a big factor in it as well. But yeah, let's imagine that just, let's play with the imagination. Let's just say they walked out of Egypt or Iran or whatever. They went through the Red Sea. Where would they end up? They would end up on the Pacific coast of North
Yes.
America. And on the old maps, terrestrial paradise is right there. It's right above in the Pacific region, above California and to the west of Oregon, Washington,
Hmm.
British Columbia, Alaska. Um, so you have that strait that goes up that side, and then you have the other side, which is on the east coast of Asia, and so I just find it interesting. But the understanding that the strait, Strait, is a maritime reference to a passage of water.
Yes.
And on those old maps in the northeast region of Asia, it actually says the Strait de Yeso, the Strait of Jesus. So you have to be more open to the idea that if these were named after Jesus, then they have something to do with Jesus. And my view is that he was the Messiah that fulfilled the old covenant. He came and took his people, and that's where they live. That's literally where they are.
Hmm.
And the whole reason that they've, fabricated this modern narrative in, you know, the Middle East is to put us in a completely different area of the world, get our minds off the right locations.
Hmm.
But yeah.
It makes it makes that make it makes too much sense.
And there's just those verses in Hebrews 11 that talk about Abraham in faith. He wandered around looking, like he put action to what his faith was. He wasn't just sitting somewhere idly, like just believing that God existed or that this land, he knew about this land as well. So that's why he was looking for it, because he knew, having come from kind of that post-Diluvian culture, the Babylonian or the Babel, plains of Shinar, which I think could potentially be China. Um, they knew the land was there, but God has it veiled. And
Hmm.
I think only those who come and are recognized by God as being part of that inheritance. I think it's a matter of really taking God at his word. That's my understanding. And yes, we do have to do our study. Like we need to know what we're actually aiming for. We have to understand, what does God actually want from us. We have to pray on that. We have to really dwell on understanding what God is asking for us to do and read the scriptures. He tells us
Hmm.
clearly what he expects of us. So I
Hmm.
believe that if God is calling people to research it more, or even go and do some reconnaissance and go check out some things, there's nothing to fear in that. I think God calls us to be bold and courageous, just like he was always calling his people into boldness and courage, and to study, and to understand things that we feel he's calling us to do, and it's okay. Um it's not opposed to the will of God that we seek him out. That's for sure.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yay! That's
But
exactly That's
yeah,
exactly what I wanted to hear. It's so good. I'm being signaled by my little one. I
I
think
see that.
I have to
Yeah.
grill some dinner.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Topher. It's been really nice to chat, and we'll have to catch up again because I think there's a lot of ground to cover, and I just appreciate all your knowledge and sharing that with me and others here. So thank you, and I'll probably see you again soon.
Sounds great, Madeline. Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.